written over 2,500 years ago by a Chinese military strategist, The Art of War remains one of the most influential books on strategy ever written. It's studied by military commanders, business leaders, lawyers, athletes, and anyone who faces competition or conflict. But here's what makes it timeless. Sun Tzu isn't really teaching you how to fight wars. He's teaching you how to win without fighting. Today, we're exploring this ancient masterpiece that has shaped strategic thinking across centuries and cultures. Despite being written for literal warfare, its principles apply to business competition, negotiations, personal conflicts, and any situation where you need to outthink and outmaneuver opponents. What makes Sun Tzu's approach revolutionary is his emphasis on intelligence, deception, and psychology over brute force. He teaches that the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting, to win through superior positioning, preparation, and understanding, rather than through direct confrontation. Violence is the strategy of last resort, used only when smarter approaches have failed. The book is organized into 13 chapters, each addressing a different aspect of strategy: planning, waging war, strategic attack, positioning, momentum, weakness and strength, maneuvering, variables, terrain, ground formations, the 9 situations, attack by fire, and the use of spies. Together, these create a complete philosophy of strategic thinking. Over the next 20 minutes, we'll explore Sun Tzu's core strategic principles, knowing yourself and your enemy as the foundation of victory, winning without fighting through superior positioning, the importance of deception and information, using speed and timing to your advantage, adapting to circumstances rather than following rigid plans, and applying these ancient principles to modern business and life situations. If you face competition in any form, if you need to make strategic decisions under uncertainty, if you want to understand how to position yourself advantageously before conflicts arise, or if you're simply curious why this 2,500-year-old military text is quoted by everyone from generals to CEOs, this is your guide. Let's master the art of war. Chapter 1. Know yourself. Know your enemy. Sun Tzu opens with what he considers the foundation of all strategy. If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself, but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. This principle, that knowledge is the foundation of victory, runs throughout the entire text. Sun Tzu emphasizes that before engaging in any conflict, you must thoroughly understand both your own strengths and weaknesses and those of your opponent. This understanding determines whether you should fight at all, and if so, how and when. Knowing yourself, Sun Tzu teaches that honest self-assessment is essential. You must know your capabilities, resources, strengths, and critically, your weaknesses and limitations. Most leaders overestimate their strengths and underestimate their weaknesses, leading to costly defeats. The wise strategist is brutally honest about what they can and cannot do. In modern business terms, this means understanding your company's actual capabilities, not just your aspirations. What are your core competencies? What resources can you truly deploy? What are your genuine weaknesses that competitors might exploit? Many businesses fail because leaders confuse wishful thinking with realistic assessment. Knowing your enemy Sun Tzu advocates gathering extensive intelligence about opponents, their capabilities, resources, strategies, leadership, morale, and weaknesses. The side with better information has enormous advantage. Battles are often won before they're fought through superior intelligence that reveals where and how to strike. He emphasizes that this knowledge must be specific and current, not based on assumptions or outdated information. You must know what your enemy is actually capable of now, not what you think they're capable of, or what they were capable of in the past. The 5 factors. Sun Tzu identifies 5 fundamental factors that determine outcomes. The way, moral alignment. Do your people believe in the cause? Heaven, timing and natural conditions. Earth, terrain and geography. Command, leadership quality and ability. And doctrine, organization and discipline. Assessing these factors for both yourself and your opponent reveals where advantages and disadvantages lie. If you have superior leadership but they have better resources, this determines your strategy. If you have strong morale but they have advantageous position, you must account for this in planning. Modern applications. In business, knowing yourself means honest assessment of your company's capabilities, resources, culture, and limitations. Knowing your competitor means understanding their strategy, strengths, weaknesses, and likely responses to your moves. In personal conflicts, knowing yourself means understanding your emotional triggers, biases, and behavioral patterns. Knowing your opponent means understanding what motivates them, what they fear, and how they're likely to respond to different approaches. The danger of ignorance. Sun Tzu warns that acting without knowledge is the height of foolishness. Commanders who engage without understanding the situation, who attack without knowing enemy strength, who advance without knowing the terrain, these commanders bring ruin to their armies. The modern equivalent is businesses launching products without understanding the market, entering negotiations without researching the other party, or making strategic moves without considering competitor responses. These errors rooted in ignorance lead to predictable failures. Continuous assessment. Sun Tzu emphasizes that assessment isn't a one-time activity, but continuous. Situations change, capabilities evolve, and circumstances shift. The strategist must constantly update their understanding of both themselves and opponents, adjusting plans as new information emerges. This principle of continuous assessment prevents the common error of fighting the last war, using strategies that worked previously, but don't match current reality. The winning strategist's knowledge is always current and accurate. Chapter 2. Winning without fighting. Perhaps Sun Tzu's most famous teaching is that the supreme excellence consists in breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting. This principle, that the highest achievement is victory without battle, reverses conventional thinking about conflict and reveals the sophistication of his strategic philosophy. Why avoiding battle is superior. Sun Tzu explains that battle is expensive, risky, and destructive even when you win. Resources are consumed, people are harmed, and outcomes are uncertain. Even victorious armies suffer casualties and depletion. Therefore, winning without fighting preserves resources, eliminates risk, and achieves objectives more efficiently. He teaches that forcing battle indicates failed strategy. If you must fight, it's because you've failed to create conditions where fighting is unnecessary. The truly superior strategist wins before anyone realizes they were competing. Strategic positioning, Sun Tzu's method for winning without fighting, centers on positioning. Create such advantageous position that opponents recognize they cannot win and yield without fighting. This requires patience, preparation, and often waiting for the right moment rather than forcing premature engagement. The commander who attacks enemy plans, disrupting them before they're executed, wins at the strategic level without fighting. The commander who attacks alliances, isolating enemies before conflict, wins at the diplomatic level. The commander who attacks armies in the field, the actual fighting, is the least skilled, having failed at higher levels. Subduing through psychology. Much of winning without fighting involves psychological warfare. If you can convince opponents they've already lost, they may surrender without battle. If you can make your strength appear overwhelming, weaker opponents withdraw. If you can create fear and confusion, enemies may flee or surrender. Sun Tzu teaches that perception often matters more than reality. The appearance of overwhelming force can win battles that actual force would struggle to win. The appearance of weakness can lure enemies into traps. Managing perception is as important as building actual capability. Modern business applications. In business, winning without fighting means achieving market dominance through positioning, not price wars. It means making competition irrelevant by creating unique value rather than directly competing on existing terms. Companies like Apple win without fighting by creating products so superior that competition becomes irrelevant. They don't engage in the specifications race. They define entirely different terms of competition where they have advantage. Negotiations work similarly. The best outcome is the other party agreeing to your terms without contentious back and forth, because you frame the situation so they see your terms as their best option. This requires preparation, information, advantage, and psychological understanding. The role of deterrence. Sun Tzu advocates building overwhelming capability, not to use it, but to deter opponents from challenging you. When your strength is obvious, rational opponents don't attack. Your capability wins without fighting by preventing fights from starting. This principle applies in business through building such strong brand, resources, and capabilities that competitors choose to compete elsewhere rather than challenge you directly. Microsoft's dominance in operating systems deterred competitors not through fighting, but through apparent invincibility. Attacking strategy, not forces. The highest level of winning without fighting is attacking enemy strategy itself. If you can understand opponent plans and disrupt them before execution, you've won before they've begun. This requires intelligence and timing, but preserves resources and eliminates battle risks. In business, this means anticipating competitor moves and positioning yourself so their strategy fails regardless of execution. If you know a competitor plans to compete on price, you shift competition to quality or convenience where they're weak. Their strategy fails without you directly confronting them. Patience and preparation. Sun Tzu emphasizes that winning without fighting requires patience to create advantageous positions and preparation to be ready when opportunities appear. Rushed strategies that force premature engagement usually require costly fighting. The wise strategist waits for the right moment, when enemy is weak, when your position is strong, when circumstances favor you. This patience is difficult because it requires resisting pressure for immediate action but it leads to superior outcomes. Chapter 3. All warfare is based on deception. Sun Tzu teaches that all warfare is based on deception, that concealing your intentions, misleading opponents, and creating false impressions are fundamental to strategy. This isn't about dishonesty in the moral sense. It's about denying enemies the information they need to defeat you while feeding them false information that leads them into errors. Appear weak when strong, strong when weak. Sun Tzu's most famous tactical advice is about managing perception. When capable, feign incapacity. When active, inactivity. When near, make it appear you are far away. When far away, that you're near. The logic is strategic. If enemies know your true capabilities and intentions, they can prepare effective counters. But if they're deceived about your strength, position, or intentions, they'll allocate resources incorrectly, position themselves poorly, and make exploitable errors. Appearing weak when strong lures enemies into attacking where you're actually strong, allowing you to defeat them decisively. Appearing strong when weak deters attacks you couldn't survive, buying time to genuinely strengthen. Concealing your moves. Sun Tzu teaches that plans should be concealed until execution. If enemies know your intentions, they can prepare defenses or strikes that neutralize your advantage. Secrecy preserves the element of surprise, which often determines outcomes. Modern military operations follow this principle obsessively. Operational security prevents enemies from knowing plans until too late to counter. Business follows it through confidential strategic planning, non-disclosure agreements, and careful information control, creating false trails. Beyond concealing true intentions, Sun Tzu advocates actively creating false beliefs in enemy minds. Make them think you'll attack east when you'll attack west. Make them think you're retreating when you're repositioning for attack. Make them think they've won when you're springing a trap. This misdirection causes enemies to commit resources defending against false threats, while leaving actual targets vulnerable. Their preparations become liabilities when based on false information, exploiting enemy assumptions. Sun Tzu teaches understanding and exploiting enemy assumptions. If enemies assume you're predictable, being unpredictable creates advantage. If they assume you'll retreat when pressured, attacking instead catches them off guard. If they assume you're honor-bound by conventions, unconventional moves succeed. The key is recognizing what enemies assume or expect, then deliberately violating those expectations in ways that create exploitable confusion and errors on their part. Modern applications in business, deception isn't about lying, it's about strategic ambiguity. Apple's secrecy about product development prevents competitors from responding effectively. Companies launch decoy products to mislead competitors about strategic direction. Negotiations involve calculated revelation and concealment of information to shape the other party's perception. Poker players practice this constantly, concealing strong hands and advertising weak ones, creating patterns then breaking them, managing table image to induce exploitable opponent errors. The player who never bluffs is predictable. The player who bluffs perfectly, balanced with value hands, is unbeatable. Information warfare. Sun Tzu emphasizes controlling information flow, revealing what benefits you, concealing what doesn't, and feeding false information that misleads enemies. In his era, this meant spy networks and misinformation. Today, it includes PR, strategic leaks, and information operations. The side that controls the information narrative often controls outcomes. If you can shape how situations are perceived by allies, enemies, and observers, you can create reality that's more important than physical facts. Unpredictability as weapon. While humans crave patterns, Sun Tzu teaches that predictability is tactical weakness. If enemies can predict your moves, they can prepare counters. Strategic unpredictability prevents effective preparation against you. However, unpredictability must be strategic, not random. Random behavior confuses allies as much as enemies and prevents coordination. Strategic unpredictability means opponents can't predict specific moves while still understanding your general capabilities and objectives. The ethics of deception, Sun Tzu, doesn't address ethical concerns about deception. In war, survival justifies deception. Modern applications require ethical consideration. Business deception must stay within legal and ethical bounds, distinguishing strategic ambiguity from fraud. The principle translates as, control what information others have about your capabilities and intentions, but don't cross into illegal or immoral deception. Strategic positioning through information control is legitimate. Lying about facts is not. Chapter 4. Speed, Timing, and Momentum. Sun Tzu places enormous emphasis on speed, timing, and momentum, teaching that these temporal factors often determine outcomes more than strength or numbers. The strategist who moves at the right speed, strikes at the right moment, and builds unstoppable momentum wins against stronger but slower opponents. The importance of speed. Sun Tzu teaches that rapidity is the essence of war, that speed provides tactical and strategic advantages that compensate for other weaknesses. Fast forces can strike before enemies prepare, can exploit temporary opportunities before they close, and can compound initial advantages before opponents recover. Speed creates uncertainty in enemy minds. Slow, predictable forces allow opponents time to analyze, plan, and prepare counters. But forces moving faster than enemy decision-making cycles create paralysis. By the time enemies understand the situation and decide on response, the situation has changed. In modern warfare, this concept evolved into the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, act. The side that completes this cycle faster than opponents can disrupt enemy decision-making, creating cascading advantages. In business, companies that move faster than market can establish positions before competitors respond. Strategic timing. Sun Tzu distinguishes speed from timing. Speed is moving quickly. Timing is moving at the right moment. Sometimes the right moment is immediate action. Sometimes it's patient waiting for circumstances to align. The art is recognizing the right moment. When enemy is vulnerable, when your advantages are maximized, when circumstances favor action, when windows of opportunity open. Acting too early wastes the advantage of surprise on unfavorable circumstances. Acting too late misses opportunities that won't recur. Great commanders and strategists develop intuition for timing through experience and study. They recognize the pregnant moment when action produces disproportionate results, what Sun Tzu calls the strategic configuration of power. Building and using momentum. Sun Tzu uses the metaphor of water flowing downhill, unstoppable momentum that overcomes obstacles through accumulated force. In warfare, momentum is built through initial successes that demoralize enemies, embolden your own forces, and create psychological advantage beyond physical facts. The army winning early engagements gains confidence and coordination, while opponents lose morale and cohesion. This psychological momentum becomes self-reinforcing. Success leads to more success, while defeats compound into collapse. In business, companies that gain early market share build momentum through network effects, brand recognition, and resource accumulation that makes them progressively harder to challenge. Amazon's momentum came from early market position that enabled infrastructure investment, that enabled better service, that attracted more customers, creating a reinforcing cycle. The danger of prolonged conflict. Sun Tzu warns that prolonged campaigns exhaust resources, strain morale, and create vulnerabilities. Therefore, strategy should emphasize decisive, swift action over extended grinding attrition. When conflict must be prolonged, the advantage lies with the defender, who can husband resources while attackers exhaust themselves. Modern military strategists recognize this. Germany's World War II blitzkrieg sought quick, decisive victory specifically because Germany couldn't win extended resource wars. In business, price wars and sustained competitive battles drain all participants. The wise strategist either wins quickly or avoids the fight, striking at the right moment. Sun Tzu teaches holding force in readiness, then releasing it at the decisive moment for maximum impact. Like a crossbow held at tension, the energy is potential until the moment of release, when it becomes devastating. This means sometimes doing nothing while building capability and waiting for the right moment. Action for its own sake dissipates energy and reveals intentions. But sudden, overwhelming action at the right moment, after patient preparation, decides outcomes. In negotiations, this appears as patience through most of discussion, then decisive action at the critical moment when the other party is most vulnerable to agreement. In business, it's building capabilities quietly, then launching at the moment of maximum market receptivity. Adapting tempo. While Sun Tzu emphasizes speed and momentum, he also teaches varying tempo strategically. Sometimes slowing down is advantageous, to let enemies make mistakes through impatience, to consolidate gains, to allow circumstances to evolve favorably. The key is matching tempo to strategic objectives. Fast when speed provides advantage, slow when patience serves better, varying tempo to keep enemies off balance and unable to predict or prepare. Modern applications. In startups, move fast and break things, applied Sun Tzu's speed principle, acting faster than established competitors could respond, accepting some errors as the cost of speed advantage. In mature markets, timing product launches for maximum impact applies his timing principles. In competitive strategy, the firm that moves faster through development cycles, decision-making, and market response typically defeats slower, bureaucratic competitors, even when the slower competitor has more resources. Chapter 5. Flexibility and Adaptation. While Sun Tzu provides specific tactical advice, his deeper teaching emphasizes flexibility and adaptation over rigid adherence to any specific approach. He teaches that water shapes its course according to the nature of the ground. The soldier works out his victory in relation to the foe he is facing. No fixed methods. Sun Tzu explicitly warns against fixed methods. Just as water retains no constant shape, so in warfare there are no constant conditions. What works in one situation fails in another. The terrain differs, the enemy differs, the circumstances differ. The strategist must adapt constantly. This creates a paradox. Sun Tzu teaches principles while insisting on flexibility. The resolution is that principles provide framework for thinking, but application must fit specific circumstances. Understand principles deeply, then apply them flexibly based on the specific situation you face. Many commanders and business leaders fail by rigidly applying approaches that worked previously without recognizing that circumstances have changed. They're fighting the last war rather than the current one. Reading the situation Sun Tzu emphasizes continuous assessment of the actual situation rather than operating based on plans or assumptions. What's actually happening? What are enemies actually doing? How are circumstances actually evolving? Adjust based on reality, not hopes or plans. The wise commander has plans but holds them lightly, ready to abandon them when reality diverges from expectations. Plans that don't match reality are worse than no plans. They create dangerous illusions that lead to errors. This requires intellectual humility and courage. Admitting plans aren't working and changing course requires setting aside ego and accepting that previous decisions were wrong. Leaders often compound errors by stubbornly persisting with failed strategies rather than adapting. Exploiting circumstances. Sun Tzu teaches that skilled strategists create advantages from whatever circumstances they encounter. Difficult terrain. Use it defensively. Adverse weather. Make it advantage through preparation. Enemies lack unexpected events. Exploit them before enemies adapt. The key is not complaining about circumstances or wishing they were different, but immediately assessing how to use them. Every situation contains possibilities for those clever enough to recognize and exploit them. In business, this appears as companies that pivot when original strategies fail, adapting to market feedback rather than stubbornly executing plans that aren't working. The successful startups are often those that adapted fastest to what they learned about market reality versus their initial assumptions. Formless strategy. Sun Tzu's highest level teaching is becoming formless. The ultimate in disposing one's troops is to be without form. When you have no form, deep spies cannot discern you, nor can the wise lay plans against you. What does formless mean? Not having predictable patterns that enemies can anticipate and counter. Being adaptable enough that by the time enemies understand your current approach, you've already changed to something else. Responding fluidly to circumstances rather than following predictable patterns. This is extraordinarily difficult because humans and organizations crave routines and patterns. Maintaining strategic flexibility while operating cohesively requires exceptional discipline and skill. Balancing consistency and flexibility. The paradox is that armies need discipline and consistency to function, yet strategy requires flexibility. Sun Tzu's solution is discipline in execution with flexibility in planning. Soldiers follow orders precisely, but commanders adjust orders constantly based on circumstances. In organizations, this translates to clear values and principles, consistency with flexible tactics and approaches, adaptability. The what remains constant. The how adapts continuously. The danger of doctrine. Sun Tzu criticizes rigid adherence to military doctrine or conventional wisdom. Doctrine provides starting points, but following it slavishly when circumstances dictate different approaches is the path to defeat. Modern military history validates this repeatedly. Commanders who adapted doctrine to circumstance succeeded, while those who rigidly followed doctrine failed. Vietnam illustrated this. Tactics successful in World War II failed in a guerrilla war requiring entirely different approaches. Business parallels are obvious. Industries disrupted by innovators are typically filled with established players, rigidly following industry best practices, while innovators succeed precisely by violating those practices. Continuous learning. Sun Tzu's emphasis on adaptation implies continuous learning. The strategist must constantly study past campaigns to understand what worked and why, current situations to understand evolving circumstances, and enemies to understand capabilities and likely responses. This learning isn't academic. It's practical focus on understanding what actually works in specific circumstances and why. The goal is building intuition for what approaches fit which situations, enabling rapid adaptation as circumstances shift. Chapter 6. Applying Sun Tzu to modern business and life. While written for military conflict, Sun Tzu's principles translate remarkably well to modern business and personal situations. This section connects ancient wisdom to contemporary applications. Business strategy applications. Sun Tzu's principle of knowing yourself and knowing your competition is fundamental business strategy. Companies must honestly assess their capabilities, resources, and limitations while thoroughly researching competitors' strengths, weaknesses, strategies, and likely responses. Many businesses fail because they don't know themselves. They overestimate capabilities or underestimate weaknesses. Many more fail because they don't know competitors. They're surprised by competitive responses they should have anticipated. The principle of winning without fighting translates to creating such strong market positions that competition becomes irrelevant or unprofitable. Amazon achieved this in many categories. Their advantages in logistics, data, and customer relationships are so large that competing directly is futile. Competitors must find different battlefields. Negotiation applications. Sun Tzu's teachings on deception and information control apply directly to negotiations. Control what information the other party has about your alternatives, constraints, and priorities. Gather maximum information about their situation. Create false impressions about your flexibility or rigidity as serves your interests. The principle of winning without fighting means structuring deals where the other party sees your preferred terms as their best option. They agree because it genuinely serves them, not because you forced agreement through conflict. Career strategy. Sun Tzu's emphasis on positioning applies to career development. Rather than competing directly for saturated opportunities, create positions where you have unique value. Develop skills that are rare and valuable. Build relationships and networks that create opportunities unavailable to others. The principle of speed and timing suggests acting decisively when opportunity appears, while having patience to wait for the right opportunities rather than forcing poor fits. Many career mistakes come from taking wrong opportunities impatiently rather than waiting for right ones. Personal conflict resolution. While Sun Tzu wrote about warfare, his principles of understanding others' perspectives, seeking win-win solutions, and avoiding unnecessary confrontation apply to personal conflicts. The goal isn't defeating people you must continue relationships with, but resolving conflicts in ways that serve everyone's interests. Understanding what others truly want, not what they say they want, allows crafting solutions that give them what they need while achieving your objectives. Sun Tzu's ideal of victory without battle. Competitive sports athletes and coaches apply Sun Tzu extensively. studying opponents to identify weaknesses and patterns, concealing your own strategies and capabilities, adapting to game situations rather than following rigid playbooks, and using psychological warfare to demoralize opponents. The best coaches win through superior preparation and in-game adaptation. They understand both their team and opponents thoroughly, position players optimally, and adjust faster than opposing coaches. Leadership lessons. Sun Tzu offers extensive leadership wisdom. Lead by example. Understand your people's motivations and morale. Never ask people to do what you wouldn't do. Reward success and punish failure consistently. Ensure people understand the mission and their role. Maintain discipline without crushing initiative. Modern leadership literature essentially rediscovers Sun Tzu's insights. Authentic leadership, servant leadership, adaptive leadership, transformational leadership, all reflect principles he articulated 2,500 years ago. Strategic patience. Perhaps Sun Tzu's most difficult teaching for modern application is strategic patience, knowing when to act and when to wait. Contemporary culture prizes action over waiting, creating bias toward doing something even when waiting is strategically superior. In investing, Warren Buffett exemplifies Sun Tzu's patience, waiting for perfect opportunities rather than forcing marginal investments. In business, patient companies build capabilities over years before striking when timing is optimal, rather than rushing to market prematurely. The limits of competition. While Sun Tzu teaches how to win competitions, he also teaches when not to compete, when fighting costs more than potential gains, when circumstances don't favor victory, when cooperation serves better than conflict. Modern application means recognizing that not every market is worth entering, not every competitive challenge worth accepting, and not every conflict worth engaging. Strategic discretion about which battles to fight is as important as winning the battles you choose. Ethical considerations. Sun Tzu wrote for literal warfare where survival justified deception and ruthlessness. Modern applications require ethical boundaries. Business competition operates within legal and ethical frameworks. Personal relationships require trust and honesty that deception undermines. The translation is using Sun Tzu's strategic principles: preparation, positioning, information management, timing, within appropriate ethical boundaries, rather than treating all life as war where anything is justified. Integration and practice. Mastering. Sun Tzu requires more than reading. It requires internalizing principles through study and practice. Analyze past decisions through Sun Tzu's framework. Did you know yourself and opponent? Did you win without fighting? Did you manage information strategically? Did you time actions optimally? Did you adapt to circumstances? This deliberate practice builds strategic intuition, the ability to recognize patterns and apply appropriate principles rapidly without conscious analysis. Like any expertise, strategic thinking improves through focused practice over extended periods. The modern relevance. Why does a 2,500-year-old military text remain relevant? Because while technology evolves, human nature and strategic principles don't. Competition, conflict, deception, timing, adaptation, these remain central to human interaction. Sun Tzu identified patterns that persist across time and culture. His genius wasn't inventing these patterns, but recognizing and articulating them so clearly that centuries later, people still recognize their truth. The principles work because they reflect reality, not because Sun Tzu was magic, but because he was extraordinarily observant about how strategy actually functions. We've explored Sun Tzu's timeless strategic principles, knowing yourself and your enemy as the foundation of all strategy, winning without fighting through superior positioning, using deception and information control to create advantage, leveraging speed, timing, and momentum to overcome stronger opponents, adapting flexibly to circumstances rather than following rigid plans, and applying these ancient principles to modern business and life. The power of the art of war is its profound simplicity. Sun Tzu doesn't offer complex theories requiring specialized knowledge. He offers clear principles based on fundamental truths about competition, conflict, and human nature. These principles are accessible to anyone and applicable to virtually any competitive or conflict situation. Let's recap the core wisdom. Victory comes from preparation and positioning, not just battlefield performance. Know yourself and opponents thoroughly before engaging. Win through superior strategy that makes fighting unnecessary. Control information. Conceal your intentions while understanding opponents. Move swiftly when action is called for, but have patience to wait for the right moment. Adapt constantly to circumstances rather than following rigid plans. And remember that the supreme achievement is winning without fighting. Here's your challenge. This week, apply one Sun Tzu principle to a situation you're facing. If you're in competition, business, sports, or otherwise, assess both your capabilities and opponents honestly. If you're in conflict, explore whether you can win without fighting through strategic positioning. If you're planning action, consider timing and whether now is the right moment. Even applying a single principle consciously will reveal how much strategic thinking can change outcomes. You'll start seeing situations differently, not as random events, but as strategic games with patterns you can understand and influence. If this summary showed you how ancient wisdom applies to modern challenges, let me know in the comments what principle resonated most or how you plan to apply Sun Tzu's teachings. And if you want to study the complete text with all 13 chapters and their nuances, there are numerous translations of The Art of War. The Thomas Cleary and Samuel Griffith translations are particularly respected. Until next time, remember, the greatest victory is the battle not fought. The greatest strategy is positioning yourself so advantageously that opponents recognize challenging you is futile. Master the art of war by seeking peace through strength, wisdom, and superior preparation. Thank you for watching.